Hi, and thank you for joining us for today's program. Today's Perspectives talk will feature the artist Sherrill Roland, whose installation After the Wake Up is currently on show as part of our summer exhibition, I Am a Citizen of the World. If you're interested in viewing more Perspectives talks from the contemporary artists featured in this exhibition, you can visit our museum from homepage through our website, blackmountaincollege.org. Sherrill Roland is an artist based in Raleigh, North Carolina, well known for the Jumpsuit Project, an ongoing work developed during his MFA at UNC Greensboro and inspired by his wrongful conviction and incarceration. In this conversation, we will be discussing the installation After the Wake Up and how it fits into Sherrill's larger body of work. Sherrill will also be discussing what citizenship means to him in the face of systemic violence. We hope you enjoyed today's program.
This idea after the wake up was kind of conceived during the time I was in grad school, wearing my jumpsuit, doing my jumpsuit project, and within that space, I was really thinking about art in a new way through the Jumpsuit Project, but also thinking about life and my reaction to my life now after being wrongfully incarcerated and coming back home. My response to art making was different, had completely changed. So, I wasn't thinking about making anything physical anymore. That's where I'm at currently now. That's all I want to do is make again. But it took me a while because my relationship to art, the sensibilities, the goals of my intention, the goals of what the work can acquire, my intentionalities of what I'm putting in the work and what I want the work to do had completely changed. So the focus for the jumpsuit was on me. And so as I grew through that project, the next way of working was also, now that my body's in this work, how can I put someone else's body in the space? And so that's where this framework of participatory project came into mind. And so with majority, even the things that I make now, physical work, sculptural 2D work, still comes from a space of reflection, revisiting how I felt, sensories of being locked up in jail. And this was a moment where I had an opportunity to work during the midnight hours. It was something, finding time to sleep was a tough thing for me and my cellmate. So we stayed up. We eventually were asked to do work if we were going to stay up anyways. So we got out of our cells. We were allowed to come out of our cells, just us two while everybody else slept. And we reworked the housing unit. We painted steps, the picnic tables, sitting areas, and cells that were empty. People were moving out of cells, jail cells, and so we went in and repainted them, did like a whitewash of the entire space. We didn't have to scrape any old paint off, just go in, do it very loose. We didn't have to sweep, we didn't have to clean it or anything before. We just white painted everything. And so in having access to other people's spaces, seeing how people lived in those confined parameters for long or extended periods of time, with dealing with the emotional toll of, why they were there, or the family members that they weren't around, or whatever, you saw how people and bodies reacted to that space. So there was a lot of carvings, there were a lot of markings, there was a lot of fidgeting and reactions to the space. And those are really interesting, and they still remained after we even painted over it. And that type of visual, and out of respect, kind of stuck with me, kind of like empathy for these other bodies and individuals and lives that had touched that space. And the things that they were dealing with was, to set context of like my perspective going in. I was already in a bad, like, I was feeling bad. And so I guess I had a higher alert to every little thing. And so in a way of like, man, I'm not the only one in a bad situation. I could visibly see these secrets inside these spaces communicated in one way or another, whether it's like writing a loved one's name or writing your neighborhood down or just scraping and scraping and scraping, off paint off a wall or off your bunk. And that's where this idea came, was an opportunity to recreate it out into the world, this instance. And that's essentially what the Jumpsuit Project was. It was like, how can I bring what I was doing, what had happened to me inside the jail, out into the school space? So it was like, well, this is a smaller instance of that large time. What happens when I bring that out into the world, bring these occurrences out into the space? And it was just a matter of like, filling in the gray area. I'm not trying to make anybody feel like they're locked up. So they have to have some part of me, which is my prompts, like my mindset, to kind of react to, but set the tunnel in which they have to travel down in order to kind of create this thing. And it only exists unless people show up and interact with it. But also it gives them a sense of ownership of the piece and contribution. And then ultimately, as like we spoke earlier, new people arrive, they see this history of lives that have kind of touched this thing, touched this wall. And, also either speaking on behalf of someone else or speaking their own responses to this work. I hope that it's built for anybody to kind of like come in on any type of day and just kind of be like, without even knowing my situation, like, with these questions or prompts, I think it'll hit anybody the same way, like, to sit with these questions and try to inscribe in this wall. It has the same rigor and exercise, the obstacles within the exercise that will still like produce the same kind of like interaction. At least that's what I'm hoping for. That it has a little bit of universal, even though my experience is something specific to this, but that the practice of it all can kind of exist in a lot of spaces, in a lot of different contexts. Just like with the suit, like a lot of, the work ends up showing you what it is. So with the suit, I had intentions, but it ended up showing me something else. And so with this, it's just, I gave the start. And everybody else is kind of driving it and bringing it home. And it's because of the people involved in this work, right, that like shape it in a way. And yeah, I'm amazed and curious every time that I see this new community. Wherever this work kind of goes, it reflects the community and people who kind of come in. Whether it be tourists or not, you're still engaging with the community here. In that response, and I think it's a really enlightening kind of way, but the vulnerability and honesty in it also is really great, without like putting faces or descriptions to a body next to it. It's just like solely honesty, solely the words and emotions through it, which is really nice. I have arrived at questioning and these type of questions because it was something I had lived and had questioned myself about. So like going into the jail, I had to really recognize my own prejudice for the other bodies and other men that were in that space with me. So this reckoning of like, depending on the context, me coming in saying that I'm innocent of this crime, which I was, but then really getting to know the individuals who are around and that innocence and guilty of a crime, the distance of that, and then really confronting myself, like, am I without fault? Am I perfect? Can I say that I'm like completely innocent? Like, I'm not a bad guy, but at the same time, like, I had to wrestle with this within myself. I had to get to know myself in that context before I started applying things to these people that I didn't know. And so out here in the world, we can hide a lot of that. And so hopefully I'm kind of, whether it comes out very elaborate or like direct, or maybe it's a little bit hidden, at least this puts you in a space of thinking and recognizing in yourself where you fit in. And that's what I'm kind of really after. It's just like to create the space. And whether that is that metaphorical or imaginative, like, right? Like, we're in an art museum, but in questioning these, when approaching these questions, confronting these questions, now it's more, this intellectual space of like mirroring, looking at yourself in the mirror, like doing deep thought, like, you kind of separates everything else, and there's work that's kind of going on. And that's kind of where I was hoping to like place people, because that battle was still in my mind in that space back in DC myself. Like, when I come out, can I, is that right or wrong that I'm like, prejudging these individuals for their mistakes? And you should be allowed to make mistakes. You know what I'm saying? There should be some type of grace after that too, and all of those things. I had a hard time, and I don't want anybody. I don't want my point to make like anybody feel the harshness of it, because then it's like it still feels immeasurable to me. Like I can't really put it in full or contain it in one thing. And so, but for the most part, I know that in speaking about this, there has to be an entryway to this space somehow, to bring people close without like. Like you think about jail now, like we can't get in the city jail downtown. Like there's no way in, not even if we wanted to, like to go in there and interview. There will, it's tough to get around these things. So I, try to subconsciously or like, have that in my mind in a way that like, yeah, it's not everybody's going to be able to experience this. And if you have, you're not going to want to relive it. So like, also considering people who have been incarcerated, right, come in and like, it takes them there without, without really physically like triggering, so, thinking about entryways into this experience. And even with the other piece that I just recently made, you don't have to be in jail to think about like the sensory of the emotion. Like at a time, you may have just done it walking as a kid down a hall or something like that. So, trying to find ways of making it accessible, and then again reshaping the space in your mind, like making take you to a space. Because it's got to exist out here anyways. Outside of where I got the experience, has to be out here, and so trying to find, the entryway in that, in both the conversion, is something that what eventually ends up coming out in the world. There's a lot of ideas in the studio that don't make it, but the ones that do become end up being, which I really enjoy getting to know my own work or where these things come from, ends up being really simple, if I say so, of ways of, and then like that's like really good. Like, oh man, to me, like, oh sweet, like it's not, people can come in but then everything is here, and that's what I like about it. Yeah, I think, when thinking about citizenship, for me, I think it's more of an experience. My experience is moving through this country as a citizen, and then trying to recognize what luxuries are really afforded to me, if I have equal rights, which then, is linked to like equal opportunities and et cetera. And it seems like we're all on the same track, like if it was a running track. Uh, but the risk of these opportunities for me, once I get involved in the criminal justice system or around that area, things that are placed on my body with just operating simple things in life, the risk, the setbacks are a lot more violent or a lot more detrimental, larger setbacks, larger declines for me and my body. And it's one thing to be told in a way of elders or generations before me of how they operated during certain times. But then to really start to recognize my body in space, once I started becoming a little bit, adolescence, getting a little older in age, those responsibilities of my own self, right? Like, there's things where the distance between your parents' protection over you kind of distance, right? You start to, as you get older, you follow and get into more new spaces and things of that nature. And that's when I started to recognize like the shaky ground, the comparing risk factors and dangers from my counterparts and my friends who were not Black, and things of that nature. So yeah, citizenship comes at a risk as far as my body is concerned, as far as like my response to this. Even with my personal experience of with incarceration made that very apparent, and made me question these the innocence and guilty. Do I have even ownership over my innocence, in a sense that like it was taken away from me and then somehow supposedly given back, right? But then, it doesn't feel that way because it feels even like I'm even more, it's jeopardized even more because I've already kind of been down this path. So if I cross the criminal justice system again, this is going to be attached to it, and it's going to be like a whole different type of validness for the criminal justice system, in a way of thinking that like, the mistake that we thought he had made, was excusable, but now like we're not letting him get the second. Like, does this make sense? So yeah, that's I feel more on shaky ground. I feel more paranoid in that sense. Of being a citizen and moving around with and that's just my personal experience. But then it's also, I don't think collateral is the same thing, but it's also proximity, right? Like when I see other lives that look like myself have worser experiences, that also is like informing my paranoia and all of those tensions too. I've noticed it in good things. Especially like earlier in my daughter's age, I recognized that her birthday symbolized the distance from when I was incarcerated, because she was born when I was incarcerated. So for every year she got older, it was a direct tie to this experience. So it was hard having good things be attached to that, if that makes any sense. So she's getting older, and I'm working it out in other ways that I can give her day, without having my cloud come with it. Yeah, and with statistics being so high, it's more so I'm working against the clock. Like as I progress in life, it's just more like, well, there's a matter of time, it's a matter of time. And that's not a great way to kind of move through. You kind of want to move through as a sense like of entitlement, and sense like, no, this is all I am able. This is all my right, as opposed to thinking that something is just allowed for a certain amount of time. And then it's more like, well, what all can I do before my time runs out? So it's tough. I still find myself to be very young as far as my practice is concerned, and I'm happy to see where they have been going. I just got gallery representation recently from Tanya Banakdar Gallery in New York, which is new for me, to be able to be invited, with this type of content in my work, to be exhibited in such a way and in that space was something I was always curious about, see if my work could travel in that space, because I appreciated being in spaces like this where conversation can be had, programming can be put around it in such a way. So I'm excited about that, excited for more opportunities to create more work. And there is this other part of my work that, again, works off of what I learned from the Jumpsuit Project, which is the social engagement part about it. So I have some collaborations that I've been trying to entertain with law students in creating work that can kind of critique the law in a way. And I'm really interested in that. One, I have like this personal curiosity, inquiry in learning about the law more. And the flame behind my butt is just about like, I felt so overwhelmed by the law. I felt so at a disadvantage with my lack of knowledge of the law, that now I find it like, when I find it, I want to be involved in conversations with it, and kind of ways to kind of ask my questions towards it, critique it in a way. So that's where I'm kind of at, still making my own work, but also seeking opportunities with law schools to create and collaborate on work, to have conversations across the aisle, build a bridge with the work. I have a show with Wake Forest Law School at SICA that I'm excited about. It's an expansion or extension of my weights sculpture, and we're going to work with that and see what we can kind of investigate and research, and then talk about and build together. Yeah, so it's good. I'm like sweet, because they're students right now, but at the same time they're like teaching me. Every time I come in with a notepad and talk to them, and the way that they speak about the law and engage with it, like, to be honest, it feels like we're on two totally different planets. But that's the excitement. That's where I find excitement, in the sense of how close can we get, and then allowing the work to be created in that type of pursuit towards one another and engagement. So like, I, as an artist, I have my own thoughts, but I'm a round peg trying to go into a square hole. And so it's just kind of like, we'll be like, well, that doesn't work on this side like that. I'm like, oh, well, why not? And then, and then we kind of keep going back and forth. And that's where the magic for me is, for both sides, not only beneficial and valuable for the individuals who participate in it, but also what can possibly be the finished product of the outcome of those conversations.